I have raw video that I just premiered. It is an old video from 2020, but I've been going through all the old videos to relaunch on the other channel, and that really, the prescience of it, it was unnerving, really. Um, but I really like that video. It's one of my favorite videos that I've created. So if you haven't seen it, check it out. So last stream, there was something really important that I never got to, and one of the main themes of the last live stream was about healing our lineage and learning to have objective self-analysis tools in our toolkit. And it's a very difficult skill to acquire because the ego and also our sort of engineered perception um, have a deep connection to our survival instincts. And so, when we confront our cognitive bias, when you confront cognitive bias and cognitive dissonance in other people, the tendency is to completely shut you down or to cancel you, to delete you from their life. And that's because you are confronting their survival instincts, basically. This stuff is integrated with our most primal survival instincts. And so the necessity is, first and foremost, to really have a sense of our own value. And the biggest mistake I think that we can make in this culture is to define our value or to derive our value relative to the standards of the culture that we are in. And almost everyone does this to some extent. This time in South America has actually showed me that even though I'm a person that has never really given any value at all to mainstream ideologies, or I don't really share the dominator culture value system at all, I still discovered that a lot of my ideas of my own self-worth were bound up in, whether I had money or not, and these sort of yeah, you think so? What's going on? Is I've noticed people are jumping on and jumping off right away. Um, you just think I should start over, Charles? I'll start over. So last week we were basically talking about how we have to heal our lineage by developing the capacity to objectively analyze ourselves in relation to, not yet, wait, okay. What am I waiting for, Charles? Okay. He must know something that we don't. By the way, I did upload the middle pillar to the Patreon site today. So if you're interested in the Ritual Magic course, there is another. So am I still waiting? Charles, do you have some kind of like plan that you're executing out there or something? Okay. Sure, sure. Um, but I mean, we're 5 minutes in, so how about now? Um, so what I'm getting at, where I'm going with all this, is that yeah, yeah, okay, that you cannot define yourself in relation to our culture's value system, uh, because it's extremely toxic. It is superficial, and it's wrong. And here's the reality: we are all a fragment of one consciousness, and so your self-worth, your value as an individual human being or an individual sentient being does not change based on your pedigree, based on your sophistication and politesse, your level of education, your net worth. At the end of the day, none of these things have any real bearing on who you fundamentally are and how you should relate to and value yourself. And I think, as you know, a first step um, towards transcending the influences of our past, of our parents, of our circumstances, of our provisional programming, of our cultural indoctrination, is to really have this sense of an eternal um, homeostasis, a permanent state that is essentially you. And this is, you know, where the value of the true will, I think, is also really important to understand. I was actually really surprised the other day to go to a thelemic Facebook group and discover that there were a lot of people in there that didn't actually believe that the true will was a thing. And it really gave me pause to kind of consider, why do I believe that? And the answer for me is that I have essentially been the same person my entire life. I have had the same overall agenda literally as long as I can remember. And so I always felt like everyone has this essential being, and I just didn't understand why so many people didn't seem to understand that there is some fundamental purpose that we all have, and that we're all going to be fundamentally unhappy unless we discover that purpose and commit every deed and every breath and every thought to that thing, whatever it is. And so, you know, that's the crisis of purpose that I'm always talking about. And I think it's absolutely true that you know, when I meet people that are lost, that don't have any kind of integrity, or you know, they have no that often they have drug problems. Um, they're almost always people that are not musicians. They're not artists. They're not poets. They're not singers. They have no real creative outlet and no clear cut, concise concept of what their purpose is. And that, as far as I can tell, is the real central source of the discontent and the unhappiness that we're facing in the world. And it is also uh, what has allowed the people that are taking advantage of humanity, basically, to manipulate people so much. It's it creates this sort of purposelessness that is conducive to you know, creating a person that is easy to lead around, that is easy to intimidate, that is easy to control, because they're just really trying to survive and not get hurt, and there's not really much beyond that. And so I think that really easy to sort of hypnotize the population with shiny things that glitter but are not gold. If they don't have a connection to this fundamental purpose, and I like to offer evidence that the leaders, people. There's a lot of contention, right, about how much of what happens in our society is actually malicious and how much of it is just opportunity that people are taking advantage of, and how much of it is just coincidental. And I totally agree with the conspiracy theory critics that they tend to make judgments about everything, that it's all part of this thing, that it's all contrived. And I don't think that it's as contrived as they say, but I think it's really easy to establish that a lot of it is. And one of the best points that I can make in relation to that is that we have had studies done over the decades for quite a while now that have established with absolute certainty that children do better when they're allowed to pursue their interests in their education. They learn according to their own ingenium, and it's not necessary for a child who has a certain nature that is going to compel him to work with his hands entirely to learn calculus, and forcing a person to try to act in ways that are not in accordance with their fundamental self, is going to cause these value judgments that we have been talking about. It's going to, cause a lot of disharmony and discontent. And I think the fact that our leaders know this and yet they choose to pursue the educational curriculum that they do is good evidence that they're not really trying to cultivate a population whose goal is to live to its highest potential. They want people to live to their highest potential as that relates to the parameters that they have dictated, you know, to suit their own purposes. But that's not necessarily going to be fulfilling to people, and that's why we see this horrific state of the human race. And so that's it, really. I mean, we have to know our own value, right? And whether you're talking about as a professional or just as a person, you're never going to get paid what you're worth unless you really know what you're worth. And so this is the same concept applied to our spiritual dimension, that we're never going to derive the satisfaction and enjoyment and the highest possible expression of our individual selves if we don't know our own worth. And what our own worth is that we are a fragment of the Most High God, if you want to think of it in those terms, a fragment that is equal to any other part of it, right? Your finger is no more or less you than your nose or any other part. And so that is how I think of divinity. And, here in South America, a lot of the tribes, but, the Shuar come to mind, the idea of prostrating yourself on the ground and groveling before the deity or before a great spirit, or however you want to think of it, is absolutely absurd. It's actually dangerous, and it's not what this being wants of you. It would expect you to have pride and dignity and a sense of your own self-worth, because your job is to express and experience as an avatar of this consciousness. And so groveling and being pathetic and begging and pleading and considering yourself something lower than divinity is not a thing here. And I think that's a really powerful lesson for people that have been brought up in Western culture where, people are supposed to be less than God. In fact, the Lucifer was cast down from heaven just for, basically considering himself to be equal with the divinity. And as a fragment of that consciousness, you are absolutely equal to it. And so I think that, this recognition that regardless of your circumstances, regardless of your function, regardless of your bank account balance, regardless of your full state, you always have the same fundamental value as a person. And it has nothing to do with any of these cultural conventions that have been imposed on us that we define ourselves in accordance with. Those things are not even relevant. All that is relevant is that you are a fragment of this universal consciousness and that you are equal to it. And then setting about constraining experience to conform to the conditions that are supplied by your true will and your understanding of your inheritance and your worthiness and your and this has a lot of layers of potential for power and empowerment and exoneration from suffering and low self-esteem. Because if you understand that you are a fragment of this eternal consciousness and you are equal to it in its entirety, you will no longer feel that you're not worthy, that you're not good enough to receive gifts of abundance and blessings and to experience things at their absolute best. And that generally is the primary limiting factor. Certainly for me, when I go back and analyze my own personal history and I look at all these moments where I abandoned something or I lost something, it was rooted in this feeling of not being worthy, and even feeling this sort of obligation to fulfill a certain negative expectation of myself. And so I think, once you can really accept this, that it is not only are you worthy of it, it's your duty as an avatar of this universal mind to receive whatever you can conceive of that is your perfect manifestation, your perfect experience, your deepest satisfactions, your here for hedonism. I always had a really hard time understanding why people would say that being a hedonist was not good somehow. That there was a criticism of living for pleasure and enjoyment and self-fulfillment. I think that that it has a lot to do with the Judeo-Christian mindset that people feel obligated to suffering and limitation, and I think also our culture has a sort of investment in cultivating that kind of perception in people. Because if you have a population that is feeling its own limitless power, subjugating them to your will and keeping them in their place is not going to be a thing. And this is why, I am such a proponent of the gnosis as an organic process, because if people have these experiences, if they are able to observe and contemplate the fundamental divine mechanisms, the wiring under the board, it always has the same effect, although to varying degrees, on the people that have these experiences. And the fundamental essence of it is that they are people that do not need to be governed and generally will not tolerate being governed. And I think that, it's difficult for us to wrap our heads around the fact that we have to somehow liberate ourselves from the need to be governed and to just not tolerate it anymore. Um, it is an incredible task, and it is formidable, but it's like any every system is a reflection and microcosm of the macrocosm of which it is a part. And so, uh, just as a baby bird or a human child reaches a certain stage where it has to leave the nest and go out on its own, we the crowned and conquering child must grow up, and that means in terms of the collective that the governments need to be entirely dissolved, and maybe that isn't a goal that is uh, reasonable for the entire planet. But I do think that I know enough highly intelligent people that are motivated, that, and there are enough places left on this planet that are free enough that it's probably possible to start creating intentional communities where things make sense, and where people that have had these that have had the gnosis and that have had these experiences that create a reasonable human being um, could gather and live together without even really abandoning first world comforts, and really even leaving society in its entirety. So that's it. It's that simple. And again, as far as like the actual um, work that has to be done to create and maintain the state of mind that facilitates these kind of developments in individuals. We have the psychedelic compounds that give us the neuroplasticity that we need, the capacity for self-reflection, the enhanced communication between different regions of the brain, meditations of all sorts and different kinds. We have ritual magic that allows us to compose our microcosm, our circle, to define our universe and cleanse all the elements that dare to enter into the domain of a god or goddess. And so it's, if we use these things with um, okay, well, have you seen any of my videos about this? I mean, I think there's a lot going on with the idea of UFOs, and their manifestations are a bit baffling to me. I've s- I have seen with my own eyes what appear to be vessels that moved in ways that were astonishing, but I also am very much inclined to believe that really, really advanced races do not require metal to get around. Traveling with your light body, the Merkaba actually means body of light, and so um, I don't know exactly what to think of it, and I think that we can't really think just one thing about it. Um, it's probably a collection of phenomena that there isn't really just one good explanation for. But in one of my videos, I reference it in a few of them, but one of my videos in particular, I was just looking at it today. I don't remember what it's called, but I think it's got an alien on it. Probably pretty easy to spot the thumbnail. Um, I, I was invited to this gathering in New Mexico, and there was a bunch of natural magic and Native Americans from all over the planet, or indigenous people, I should say, from all over the planet. And their message was that there were these star tribes that were communicating telepathically with, certain people, and the people didn't necessarily even know that they were receiving this information from the star tribes. And a couple of months ago, maybe just 1 month ago, Dakota Went posted a video where he had gone to Mexico and he'd met with this tribe that of Native Americans that told him about the Star Tribes, and they described what their function is and how they relate to humanity exactly the same. I mean, if you watch his video and my video, it's, you know, it's the identical story. And I think that that is pretty compelling. I mean, I seriously doubt that Dakota Went watched my video and just copied it. I mean, well, actually, he wasn't just telling the story either. He was with these Native Americans, and the date on mine is 3 years prior to his story, and it's the same story. And, I talk in my video about how there were actually alien encounters or something along those lines that occurred around these people. And that's something that everyone around this tribe, all of the locals and all of the people that were in Dakota Went's crew, they all reported the same thing, that there actually were UFO phenomena around these people. And another element of it, from my own experience, that I think is pretty compelling is that the night that I actually saw what appeared to be gray aliens, the next day I ran into 5 different people that were totally unconnected that all described having seen the same type of beings that night all over Durango, Colorado. And so, that's pretty crazy. And it was a lot to experience that, to have had the experience myself. And then the next day, literally everyone that I ran into had the same experience that night. So it kind of appeared that Durango, Colorado had been totally invaded by these Star Tribe beings. So yeah, I mean, I don't really know what to think of it. And Terence McKenna's theory basically was that there's some aspect of the subconscious mind that has somehow materialized, much in the way that, when you evoke a spirit or a demon to visible form, it's, as Robert Anton Wilson said, they're not real in the way that the IRS is real, but they're real enough. And so that's kind of what Terence McKenna's interpretation of the UFO phenomena was, although, it was a little bit more sophisticated. But I think it amounts basically to something along the lines of a collective hallucination. And I don't think that that's a sufficient explanation at this point for these phenomena. And eat your mushrooms. Yeah, and it's interesting that the raw contact, I don't know what that is, but during this period where, I was having these experiences of contact with the Star Tribes, raw was like, I don't want to say an obsession, but really a focal point for me spiritually. In fact, one of the days during this period that really stuck out, I felt compelled to go to this field and sit on this big rock, and during this period I had this voice that would kind of guide me. It never told me to do anything bad or crazy, but when I followed its instructions, they always turned out to be true, which is pretty incredible from my point of view. So this particular day, it was trying to compel me to go out to this field and do this ritual. And at the time, I felt like, rituals were silly. I didn't know any rituals. I didn't really see any reason to follow through with this, but I started to walk out to the field, and I stopped, and I was going to turn around and go home, and my phone in my pocket beeped, the flip phone back in the day, and I took it out and read it, and it said, it was a text message that said, "You and your brothers will echo this gospel to the 4 corners of the globe, and yet the sun shines on. And the sun was going down, and I understood that this was a solar ritual and that this was a message telling me that I didn't have much time to go out and complete this task. And so the message was from the singer in my band, who later told me he had no idea why he sent that. And he's from the swamps in Texas. He doesn't talk like that. It was totally insane. And so I went out to the field and I sat on the rock and I'm like, okay, well, what do I do now? And this voice in my head says, raise the energy. And I really didn't know exactly what that meant, but I tried to just will the energy in the vicinity to raise. And as soon as I did that, all the rattlesnakes in the field all started rattling their tails at once. And so I took that as a sign that I had succeeded in raising the energy. And so I said, well, what now? And said, well, what is your name backwards? And a few weeks prior, I had figured out that there is sort of a veil between worlds, and that everything is reversed as it passes through the veil. And so my name backwards, it occurred to me in that moment, would be something along the lines of my true name. And so I thought, my name is Harley. So I was like, Yell Ra. And I realized I'm staring at the sun. I'm supposed to do this solar thing, and I realized Ra, yell Ra. So I start screaming Ra at the sun at the top of my voice. And I did this until I was pretty much exhausted, and then walked back to the house. And the next day I saw on the front of the newspaper that there had been the biggest solar storm in human history, right at the moment that I was doing this solar ritual. And of course, I'm not saying that I provoked that, but I am inclined to think that whatever was guiding me did know that there was some sort of tremendous solar event, and that there was some kind of energetic relationship with what I was doing and what was happening in the sun. And so I think that it's really difficult for us to come to any sort of conclusion about what these entities that we encounter from time to time, whether they seem to present themselves in the form of, interplanetary, extraterrestrial type life forms, or, DMT entities, who every time I've encountered a DMT entity or ayahuasca spirit, the information that they have given me has turned out to be true if they tell me anything at all. And so, and I mean like really specific, accurate stuff. So, I actually received information about the Sirius star system before the paper was published a few days later, during an ayahuasca ceremony. And so, my personal experience is pretty overwhelming that there is some substance to these experiences, and that there is some kind of objective reality, but I don't know whether or not it's just consciousness communicating with itself and giving some kind of form to the communication, or if it's, I lean towards the idea that the universe is just teeming with life and intelligence, and it's fundamentally made of consciousness. And so consciousness can basically coagulate, or it can emanate from any number of sources in any number of ways. And ayahuasca and DMT are really interesting because in the case of those compounds, it seems like the type of entities that we encounter, they all have the same aesthetic. People experience them the same way. And the realm appears to be the same to everyone. I mean, if you go to Africa and then I go to Africa, and we both describe what we saw in Africa as the same, there were elephants, there were trees, they were flat on the top, prairies, lions, all that stuff, then we have a consensus that we have gone to a real place called Africa, right? And so we have all these people entering into the hyperspace DMT realm and reporting the same, the same aesthetic, the same phenomena, the same type of experiences, and also these occult hangovers of precognition and telepathy and increased incidence of synchronicity after having contact with these realms. So, and people that have had contact with the star tribes also report the same type of experiences. So, all of that leaves me inclined to suspect that uh, there is, in some kind of fashion, some kind of construct of a predator-human consciousness that we are able to make contact with, and that this experience actually isn't nearly as uncommon as people tend to think, that it's not really reserved for some elite spiritual beings, or it's actually something that is relatively accessible to people. But I would offer that with a word of caution, that I have watched a lot of like people get involved in like the new age kind of trip, and it's very easy to start to believe that all of your subconscious thoughts are channeled information that's really just you're just thinking, and you want to believe all of this stuff. So I think in ancient times and in indigenous cultures, we had someone that was able to help us to develop the capacity to apply critical thinking and to evaluate intuitions, and to learn to be objective and to discern between real precognition and a wish demon. So it is serious, it is real, and it is very murky territory, I think. And people that are going to embark on any kind of practice that enhances your consciousness, whether it's a magical practice or consumption of entheogens, um, um, you need to take it seriously, because I think that one of the things that blindsides so many people that are successful in achieving this level of consciousness is that most people don't really ask what's going to happen if they expand their consciousness. They assume that what it actually means is just that they're going to be more at peace, maybe they'll have more clarity and be more creative, but I don't think most people are really expecting that the parameters of what's available to them in terms of experience are going to move. That your reality tunnel is actually going to change, and uh, that can be quite the shock, and it can be overwhelming and confusing. And so that is why I'm here. I've been through all of that stuff, and I can offer what I can to, try to assist any of you guys that are struggling with any of the phases and all of this. And I think that the one of the biggest mistakes that people make is just being too eager to believe. It seems like there's this tendency to either keep the door of the woo completely shut, or to just let it swing wide open. And I don't think that either of those options are the best. Um, it's it's the same kind of discernment and processes that you apply to things in the physical world should apply in the spiritual realm as well. And you have to be very careful with belief. A lot of people believing in negative entities, which I don't really, I've never had any experiences of that. And I have seen a lot of people that really give a lot of power over to this idea. And what is really interesting about it is that they all tend to have the same psychological predisposition, which suggests very strongly that it's not that there are entities draining their energy and feeding off of their fear or whatever. It's just that they're psychologically predisposed to need a scapegoat, because they can't take responsibility for these demons that are plaguing them. And really, at the end of the day, there is only consciousness, and Uh, Whether there is a literal external demon or not, it's still only in your head. There is only consciousness, and how we choose to relate to concepts and ideas. There's really no more of a reality than that. And so, I think in the last live stream I said this, but it's really really important, I think, to accept our sort of sovereignty over those sort of entities or ideas. Uh, and just in terms of a deterministic way to think about it, to really give yourself the power to transcend any influence that some lower vibrational influence might have, is just to remember the law of entrainment. The great secret of occultists and successful mystics and those type of people, magicians. Sure, of course, Mr. Charles. That's the thing. It absolutely does, and it's it's just like anything else. It's a bunch of truth and falsehood all mixed together, and part of our job as alchemists, basically, is to extract the wheat from the chaff, the gold from the ore. But what I was saying about this, law of entrainment, and I know I talked about this in the last stream, but it bears repeating because it's a really powerful thing to understand, that when you're talking about consciousness, you're still talking about oscillating waves. When I am speaking about a realm beyond the physical, it's not really beyond the physical. It's just more subtle than the classical. And in physics, the macro is referred to as the classical realm, I guess. And so these energies and consciousness are still subject to those same universal laws that everything else is, and they are made of the same fundamental energies and particles. And so entrainment tells us that all lower, slower pulses always entrain to the highest cycling pulse. So that is, the basis by which a magician is able to compel demons to act in accordance with his will, because he is oscillating at a higher rate, and therefore things of a lower nature have no choice but to synchronize with the oscillations of the higher consciousness. And so, understanding these things is really, really empowering. It's also true. It's real. You see it in rooms full of people. When one person is really inspired and elevated, and they bring the entire room up with them. So, and a lot of people don't like this idea that you can sort of reduce all of these spiritual experiences and concepts to a mechanistic basis. But I think that's actually the answer to getting to the root of things and having an actual functional metaphysical model, and extricating the woo from our ontologies and our concepts. Do me a favor, you guys, hit the like button, share, subscribe, support us on Patreon. We are going to see the Waorani village on Wednesday for sure. We have made arrangements, and so we're still trying really hard to raise money for that. Also, the person we were watching this property, she came home early, and I'm getting the sense that we need to move on much sooner than I'd expected, and so we're really in a crunch to raise some funds. So if you like this content and support our general mission, please support us if you can. So yeah, entrainment. Nothing has any power over you. And I think I kind of got sidetracked a while back, and I was talking about how if you really are able to develop the capacity for objective analysis, of yourself and your behaviors and your influences without guilt and without judgment, right? For example, if you're talking about your lineage and you're analyzing the impact that your parents had on you, you don't want to hate them over it. You don't want to blame them, because at the end of the day, it was just the influence of their parents that compelled them to act in the way that they did. And so there's no one to blame. There is no enemy anywhere. To quote Hassan Isabah, the fictional founder of the Illuminati, which was not fictional, by the way, Adam Weishaupt. I always recommend to people to go and read Adam Weishaupt's papers, because there really was an Illuminati and probably is an Illuminati, and they're not what people think at all. It's the opposite. That's why everyone has been told that they're the enemy, and because they're not. And it's really funny to just watch people out there, because everyone will say, like, well, everything we've been told is wrong, but then they go and find these narratives and just believe them. It's really, there's a lot of misapplication of genuine wisdom that happens in the world, and luckily we do have the capacity to improve. And it also is really powerful food for thought to consider that the guy that founded the Illuminati, his papers were seized and have been printed for decades, and you are hard-pressed to find a conspiracy theorist that has read them. That's really scary if you think about it, that people will believe wholeheartedly all of this conjecture that has absolutely no basis in evidence, no evidential basis, nothing at all, just a bunch of people just running their mouths on the internet. And no one has bothered to actually to just read the guy's papers. Very few people. And it's actually really interesting how they were uncovered. The runner that was delivering a letter got hit by lightning, and so some police officers found the letter in his pocket, and they went and raided Adam Weishaupt's house, and that's how they uncovered the plan of the Illuminati to infiltrate the Masonic lodges and actually try to get rid of organized religion and borders, and to get rid of the Masonic hold on the banks. And they were actually trying to do exactly what we're all trying to do now, to spread illuminated consciousness and to get rid of the deep state, or however you want to think about it. It's really mind-blowing that people have twisted it into this evil influence, and it's so universally accepted, even though there's not a shred of evidence. Pretty incredible. So, 48 minutes. I think I'm going to check out. I'm getting a bit tired. Just trying to think. I feel like I did get sidetracked. Something else that I wanted to wrap up. Oh, there's my phone. So, good night. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I hope that I have been of service. Please support us if you can, and we'll see you guys again soon.